I discovered in my husband's wallet receipts from extravagant restaurants, hidden away after a string of late nights. I didn't speak up, didn't cry. I just quietly collected every piece of evidence, every lipstick stain on a wine glass, every dollar vanishing from our joint account. And then, I turned his greatest pride into the trap that left the entire banquet room silent. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments where you're hearing my story from. I want to know how far it spread. I sat at the kitchen table. The silence in the house was thick, like morning fog, a silence that had become an uninvited guest, clinging to every corner, every crack in the walls. The old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from my late mother, ticked with an unrelenting accusatory rhythm, as if asking me were all those years together real, or just a cleverly draped veil. Each tick was a knife, slicing into my memories, reminding me that perhaps my life, the love I believed in, was nothing but a meticulously staged lie. I sat motionless, watching the yellow lamplight spill across the wooden table, its surface scratched and faded, like the marks on my heart. Outside, the sound of a car engine shutting off signaled Thomas was home late, as usual. The door opened, and with it came a strange, sweet scent, mingling with the familiar cologne he wore. But that sharp sweetness wasn't mine, never had been. Thomas walked in, his movements heavy, as if exhausted from a long day. He loosened his tie, unbuttoned his shirt, exhaling loudly, as if to prove he was worn out from work. But I could see it clearly. It wasn't real fatigue, just a clumsy performance. He tossed his jacket onto a chair, barely glancing at me, then pulled a few papers from his wallet, one glossy receipt slipping to the floor. I bent to pick it up, my hand trembling, as I recognized the embossed logo of an upscale restaurant, where a bottle of wine could cost an average person's monthly salary. I tucked the receipt into my notebook, hiding it silently, letting him drag himself upstairs. The bedroom door slammed shut, and soon after, his familiar snoring echoed. Once, that sound brought me peace. Now, it only made me feel like a fool. I returned to the dining table, where a half-finished glass of red wine stood, wine Thomas never drank in this kitchen. It sat there, silent as a guilty verdict, reflecting the cold yellow light. I lifted the glass, the sharp scent tightening my chest, and suddenly, that strange perfume crept in again, lingering in the room like the trace of another woman still hanging in the air. Each tick of the clock on the wall sounded like a reminder that I was no longer in a home of trust, but stepping into a shadowy room of suspicion. I didn't say a word, didn't confront him, but my heart raced, chaotic, as if it already knew some dark secret was waiting to erupt. And in that moment, I realized this silence was no longer peace. It was a storm gathering, ready to sweep everything away. The next morning, as faint light filtered through the curtains, I was already at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of black coffee. Last night, I couldn't sleep a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that restaurant receipt and smelled that foreign perfume, both piercing my mind like sharp needles. The ping of a text notification startled me. I opened it to find a bank alert. Your credit card spending has exceeded the warning threshold. My heart skipped a beat. I run a small restaurant. I know the value of every dollar. But for months, expenses from our joint account had been ballooning. I opened the banking app, my fingers trembling as I scrolled. The transactions unfolded like a list of accusations. Tiffany Jewelry, a high-end clothing boutique, round-trip tickets to Napa Valley, and a payment for a luxury hotel. All charged to Thomas's main card, but the debt split between us. I gripped the chair, my heart pounding as if it might burst. I knew every expense of mine: rice, flour, sugar, the humble supplies to keep my restaurant and kitchen running. But here were lavish, wasteful, betraying numbers. I scrolled further and found repeated payments at a newly opened imported wine bar downtown. Hundreds of dollars each time, sometimes thousands. I recalled Thomas's gleaming eyes whenever he mentioned wine partners or necessary client dinners. Now I knew they weren't clients, but a role he played to cover secret rendezvous. My finger tapped to open transaction details, and a cold note appeared. Cabernet Reserve, $500/bottle. I could almost hear the kitchen clock pause for a moment, then strike heavier. I closed my eyes, picturing Thomas in the golden glow of a lavish restaurant, raising a glass of red wine, his eyes gleaming with false satisfaction, while I, the dutiful one, slaved over kitchen orders, believing he was working for our family. A sharp pain shot through my chest, but I bit my lip, keeping myself alert. I flipped through the list, and another piece fell into place. Thomas's weekend business trips aligned perfectly with these extravagant expenses. I opened my small notebook, meticulously recording dates, times, amounts, locations. Each word was a cold blade carving into reality. I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, a place where the truth carried not just the pain of betrayal, but the looming threat of financial ruin, capable of erasing everything I'd worked so hard to build. I touched my forehead, sweat beading, despite the cool morning. A deeper fear rose within me. Beyond the affair, how much had Thomas siphoned from our joint account to fund this double life? I imagined unpaid restaurant bills, my staff looking at me with disappointment, whispers spreading that Isabella Green was no longer the steady force she once was. No, I couldn't let that happen. I had to gather every piece of evidence, every dollar, before it all plummeted. I opened the electronic receipts section, and my heart clenched again. A diamond bracelet, $6,000, delivered to an address that wasn't our home, but a high-end apartment downtown. Clara, the name flashed in my mind like a scar suddenly torn open. Clara, once a temporary employee at my restaurant. I still remembered her cold eyes and saccharine smile. I'd fired her after discovering missing tip money, and now the pieces fell together. The reckless spending, the cheap perfume, the exorbitant wine receipts, all leading to a name I thought had vanished from my life. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling suffocated, then grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and started a new list. Clara, dates, expenses, locations. I wrote with steady strokes, as if building a case file. In my mind, the clock kept ticking, no longer just accusing. It was counting down to the moment I'd pull back the curtain and expose the truth to the light. I took a deep breath, the bitter coffee taste lingering, and told myself, if these clues were kindling, it was time to gather them all and let the fire ignite, burning through the mask Thomas wore. That evening, I cleared the dinner table alone, as I had so many times, but my heart was heavy with the numbers I'd recorded in my notebook. Each receipt, each expense, was like a dagger stabbing my already fragile trust. I gathered the dishes, stepped into the garage to take out the trash, and in that seemingly ordinary moment, another clue revealed itself. The yellow light fell on the passenger seat of Thomas's car, where a faint red mark glowed like embers. I held my breath, opened the door, my hand trembling as I reached closer. It was a lipstick stain on the rim of a forgotten glass. The wine glass still carried a heavy scent, a fruity red wine Thomas never liked. He always claimed he preferred light white wines, but here, in his car, the red wine and lipstick sat starkly, a silent confession. I slid into the driver's seat, my heart racing, letting the lingering wine scent envelop me. I pictured the scene, Thomas pulling over in a dark corner, pouring wine, handing the glass to someone, and her leaving that bold lipstick mark like a brazen signature. How many times had this happened? I turned to the glove compartment, opened it, and found a hastily folded tissue. On its white surface, a gold-embossed logo from a renowned restaurant, where Cabernet bottles worth hundreds were served like water. I touched the tissue, catching the sharp, sweet perfume clinging to it. Not my familiar rose scent, but a youthful, cheap, overpowering fragrance, identical to the one that hit me when Thomas walked in the night before. I leaned back in the seat, humiliation flooding me. Late at night, in the dim garage, only my phone's flashlight illuminated the brutal evidence of betrayal. The glass, the lipstick, the tissue, the perfume, all like an invisible hand gripping me, forcing me to face a truth I'd been delaying. I pulled out my phone, snapping photos of each item, documenting like a crime scene investigator. Each shot was a cut, both painful and sobering. I knew I could no longer pretend this was just work. I closed the car door softly, afraid to wake Thomas. Back in the kitchen, the clock struck 12. Its steady tick sounded like a killer's approaching footsteps, making my skin crawl. I set my phone on the table, staring at the photos I'd just taken. A voice in my head spoke clearly. This wasn't just emotional betrayal, but a blatant financial and honorable deception. Everything I'd once trusted. I picked up the leftover wine glass from the kitchen table, holding it under the yellow light. The red liquid swirled, reflecting my face in the glass. A haggard face, tired, with dark circles, and eyes full of suppressed rage. I touched my lips to the glass, not to drink, but to taste the bitter tang lingering. It was like the taste of deceit spreading through this house. I set the glass down hard, the liquid sloshing over the rim, leaving a red stain like blood on the table. The bedroom door creaked open upstairs. I quickly tidied everything, slipping the phone into my pocket. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, his gait sluggish, eyes half closed. "You're still up?" he said, voice hoarse and sleepy. I forced a weak smile, replying calmly, "Just cleaning up. Go back to sleep." He nodded, unsuspecting, and returned to the room. The door closed, and soon his snoring resumed, steady, like a mocking soundtrack. I sat back at the table, clutching my notebook. The clues were no longer scattered fragments, but a woven thread: restaurant receipts, bank statements, the diamond bracelet, the lipstick, the wine glass, the tissue. They formed a complete picture of betrayal. And at the center was Clara's face, her cunning eyes and smug half-smile, the woman who'd walked out of my restaurant with a defiant glare the day I fired her. I thought that encounter was over, but now I realized it was just the beginning of her revenge. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, flipping through my notes, eyes glued to the evidence, letting imagined scenes torment me. Thomas and Clara, in a restaurant's golden glow, raising glasses, whispering, her lips still red with lipstick. Those images pierced my heart, but instead of breaking me, they fueled a smoldering fire. I knew it was time to stop being the naive wife, lulled by lies. It was time to prepare for the truth to come to light, a truth that could shatter the false world Thomas and Clara were building. The next morning, while Thomas still slept, I sat quietly at the kitchen table, my notebook thicker, after a long night. The photos of the wine glass, lipstick, logoed tissue, receipts, and bank statements were neatly stored in my phone, a dossier of guilt I alone witnessed. The bitter coffee scent filled the kitchen but couldn't mask the sour taste in my throat. Each tick of the wall clock urged me. It was time to act. I needed the truth, undeniable evidence, an outside perspective, to shine a light on the crack I'd already seen too clearly. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and paused at a familiar name, Evelyn. She'd been my sous chef before retiring, the one who'd seen Clara cheat customers, pocketing tips. Evelyn had patted my shoulder the day I fired Clara, saying, "A greedy person will always show their true face." I hit call, the ringing dragging on before her warm, gravelly voice answered. When I sighed and asked if she knew anyone who could discreetly investigate an affair, Evelyn wasn't surprised. She paused, then said softly, "I know someone, Marcus, a private investigator, very discreet and reliable. If you're set on this, I'll give you his number." I thanked her, my voice trembling but firm. I never thought I'd need a PI, but now I had no choice. By noon, I met Marcus at a small coffee shop downtown. I chose a secluded corner, my back to the wall, like someone preparing for a covert meeting. Marcus arrived on time, short and stocky, wearing a pale blue shirt, his sharp eyes calm, as if accustomed to peering into life's secrets. I placed an envelope before him, containing printed bank statements, photos from Thomas's car, and the restaurant receipt. Marcus flipped through each page, nodding, his face expressionless. When he looked up, his voice was low and steady. "Clear signs of an affair. I'll tail him. If you want, I'll get photos, videos, everything. But brace yourself. The truth often hurts more than you expect." I gripped my coffee cup, the heat burning my skin, but I didn't pull back. "I need to know everything," I said, my voice hoarse. "No matter how much it hurts, I have to see it with my own eyes." Marcus nodded, jotting quick notes in a small pad. Back home, I passed the living room, where Thomas was hurriedly tidying papers on the table, stuffing them into his briefcase, as if afraid I'd see. He looked up, flashing a weak smile, asking if I wanted to go for a walk tonight. I nodded absently, but inside, I laughed bitterly. After years together, I'd learned to tell a real smile from a mask, and that smile, today, was a liar's. That night, as he slept, I opened my laptop, checking the latest bank transactions. Each line on the screen was a taunt. Fine wines and spirits, $1,250. Hotel Grand Marquis, $860. Boutique Eleganza, $3,200. I wrote them all down, my hand shaking, each number hammering another nail into the coffin of my dead trust. I looked up at the kitchen mirror, seeing a face I barely recognized. Dark circles, lips pressed tight, a cold, hardened expression. I told myself, if Clara thought she could steal my husband and money while I sat idly, she'd picked the wrong opponent. 2 days later, Marcus texted, "Got photos. Meet me tonight." I went to the coffee shop, heart pounding, eyes scanning for familiar faces. Marcus set his phone on the table, swiping through images. Thomas in a gray suit, arm in arm with Clara in a tight red dress. They entered a new wine bar, its twinkling lights reflecting off Clara's triumphant smile. Thomas leaned down, raising a glass, his eyes gleaming with false pride. "Cabernet Reserve, $500, Marcus said. He ordered 2 bottles. My heart clenched, recalling the bank transaction I'd saved. It all matched, like a gruesome puzzle. I stayed silent, but a spark flared in my mind. Those expensive wines would become my weapon. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding to Marcus. He looked at me closely, then said, "I'll keep going, but prepare yourself. This won't stop here." I left the cafe, the cold wind hitting my face, but inside I was burning, a smoldering fire ready to blaze. That night, back home, Thomas was asleep, his snoring steady. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my notebook, and wrote a brief line. Initial investigation. Success. Clara confirmed. I closed the book, looked around the dark kitchen, and knew the game had only just begun. 3 days after my first meeting with Marcus, I was checking inventory at my restaurant when my phone buzzed. The message was curt. "You need to see this now." I wiped my hands on my apron and opened it. A series of photos hit me, each like a knife to the heart. In them, Thomas entered a luxury hotel lobby, shirt unbuttoned at the top, face beaming. Beside him, Clara wore a tight black dress, lips bright red, her arm looped through his, as if they were an official couple. I felt my legs weaken, gripping the bar counter to stay upright. I swiped to the next photo. They sat in a dim corner of an upscale restaurant, the table adorned with candles and flowers. Thomas leaned toward Clara, his lips curved in a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Clara tilted her head, listening, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Their wine glasses sparkled, a bottle placed center table, its label unmistakable. The rare Cabernet Thomas once promised was for our special day. I trembled, sinking into a chair, my hand clutching the phone until my knuckles whitened. In that moment, memories flooded back over 20 years ago on our 10th anniversary. Thomas had raised a glass of Cabernet, looking at me with warmth and pride. I'd believed that love was eternal. Now, in the PI's photos, that look wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to Clara, the woman I'd fired for deceit. Bitterness crashed over me like a tidal wave, washing away the beautiful memories I'd clung to. Marcus's next message appeared. "Got video. Brace yourself." I played it. The frame was slightly shaky, filmed from a distance, but clear enough to show Thomas and Clara clinking glasses. Clara leaned in, whispering something in his ear. He laughed loudly, a carefree laugh I'd forgotten the sound of. That laugh had once been the soundtrack to late nights working together in the restaurant, washing dishes, wiping tables, dreaming of a future. Now it was a mocking melody for a woman abandoned in her own life. I don't know how long I sat, only that a numbing cold spread through me. Tears wouldn't come. Anger had frozen them. I opened my notebook, writing photos and video. Betrayal confirmed. The words shook but were resolute. I knew now this wasn't just suspicion. It was raw truth. A truth Thomas could deny with words but never erase with evidence. That afternoon, when Thomas walked in, still carrying that cheap perfume, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. He dropped his keys, feigning a tired sigh. "Another long day," he said. I gave a faint smile, nodding. Inside, I burned to scream that I'd seen everything, that I knew he'd traded his devoted husband role for a shameless betrayer. But I held back. Exploding now would cost me the chance to expose him at the right moment. I would wait. That night, as he slept, I reviewed the photos and videos. Each viewing twisted my heart, but it also steeled me. I replayed Thomas laughing in candlelight with Clara, pausing at the moment he poured her wine, careful as a devoted gentleman. A cold thought crept in. Those expensive wines would be the spark. Thomas's reckless bravado, his unchecked need to flaunt, would be his Achilles heel. I closed the laptop, my eyes gleaming in the dark. The next day, Marcus met me at the familiar coffee shop. When I arrived, he slid a thick envelope toward me. All the photos, videos, spending records. "He can't deny it anymore," Marcus said. I opened the envelope, and each photo emerged. Thomas and Clara, leaving a hotel together, hand in hand. Clara beamed. Thomas bowed his head to shield his face, but his smugness was unmistakable. Another shot caught them outside a jewelry store, Thomas handing his credit card to the clerk, while Clara admired a red velvet box. In another photo, they sat in a bar, Clara's hand resting on Thomas's chest, him leaning back, laughing. I bit my lip, my hand trembling. Marcus looked at me, his eyes tinged with pity. "What's your next move?" I looked up, my voice eerily calm. "I'll let him expose himself. I don't need a heavy blow. I need a stage, and he'll perform until the curtain falls." Marcus nodded, asking no more. On the drive home, I stared out the car window, my reflection gliding past lit shop fronts. For years, I'd lived as a devoted wife, a restaurant owner who counted every penny. Now I'd become the director of Thomas's final act, and when the curtain dropped, the audience would see his true self, while I'd step out of the victim's role, head held high. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, the stack of photos before me. I studied each one, no longer reeling as I did the first time, but with a cold resolve. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but now I heard it not as an accusation, but as a countdown to the day Thomas would bury himself in his own boasts, before I revealed the final curtain. That night, after Thomas was asleep and the house sank into its familiar silence, I sat alone in the kitchen, with the photos spread out. The images of him and Clara hand in hand, clinking glasses under candlelight, were too clear, too cruel. I closed my eyes briefly, but instead of darkness, memories flooded back, scenes from a life I thought I'd lived happily. I remembered meeting Thomas when I was a 20-something working at a small seaside restaurant. He appeared with a radiant smile, strong hands, and eyes that made me believe nothing was safer than standing by his side. We dreamed together, promised to build something of our own, a small, cozy restaurant where people could find both good food and genuine warmth. I remembered winter evenings when the last customers had left, leaving just the two of us in the kitchen. Thomas washed dishes, I wiped tables, humming old songs as we worked. Back then, we had no money, but we had fierce faith in each other. Once, after cleaning up, Thomas pulled a cheap bottle of wine from his pocket, hidden to surprise me. We drank from chipped glasses, but he looked at me as if it were the finest wine in the world. I believed in those eyes, entrusted my entire life to his hands. Then came our 10th anniversary, when he brought home an expensive Cabernet, setting it before me as proof of all we'd overcome together. "We've gone further than our dreams," he whispered. I cried from happiness, believing our love would endure like the rich flavor in that glass. And now, that same Cabernet appeared in the photos Marcus gave me. But the person raising a glass with him wasn't me. It was Clara, the woman I'd erased from my life like a stain. How ironic that the symbol of our love had become evidence of betrayal. I stood, walking to the small wine cabinet in the kitchen. A few bottles we'd saved for special occasions that never came, still sat there. I touched the thin layer of dust on a cork, my hand trembling. For years, I'd waited for an invitation, a proper dinner, a tender glance from Thomas to open them. Instead, the bottles sat silent, quietly witnessing the growing distance between us. I broke down, not for the wine, but for the years of trust I'd given, for the look that once convinced me this marriage was worth it. I returned to the table, staring at the photos. Each smile, each touch between Thomas and Clara, tore at my heart. I tried to recall how many times he'd looked at me like that in the past. How long had it been since I'd seen those eyes? Decades, perhaps. I realized the pain wasn't just from his betrayal, but from my own delusion that I was still loved. I closed the notebook, shut my eyes, letting tears stream down my cheeks. I remembered Thomas's promises, his words the day we opened our restaurant. "Isabella, this place is our child. I'll always be by your side." I'd believed him. I'd worked tirelessly for years, never minding the exhaustion, to keep that dream alive. And he'd turned it into a stage for his performance. But in that searing pain, I felt something new. Those memories, instead of breaking me, were like embers turning into flame. I was no longer the naive young woman who believed every promise. I'd aged, learned to distinguish truth from lies, understood that some memories were meant to remind, not to cling to. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath. The kitchen clock ticked on, its rhythm unchanged, but now I heard it as a reminder that the past was dead, and the present was my only weapon. Thomas had stolen my dearest memories, but in doing so, he'd given me a reason to fight back. I was no longer just a victim of a lie. I would be the one to write its ending. The next morning, as I opened my notebook to jot down lingering thoughts from the night before, my phone pinged with a new bank alert. I shivered, as if the chime were a warning siren. I opened the app, eyes scanning the transaction list. A new entry appeared. Deposit, Wine and Company Investments, $25,000. My throat tightened. A wine company. Thomas had never mentioned it. I clicked for details, my heart pounding. The company's address matched an office building near Clara's neighborhood. I braced my hands on the table, my head spinning. Thomas wasn't just cheating. He was investing our shared money in a wine-related venture, the very field I dedicated my life to. But this time, he wasn't with me. He was with her. The thought choked me. I slammed my hand on the wooden table, the sharp sound ringing like a fateful gavel. That evening, when Thomas came home late, he gave a forced smile, brushed a kiss on my cheek, and mumbled about a meeting running long. I stayed silent, pretending to believe him, but inside, a storm raged. While he showered, I opened his briefcase, my hands shaking and cold. Inside was a thick stack of papers, the cover reading Wine and Company, Partnership Agreement. I flipped through quickly. The intended signee, Thomas Green. My name was nowhere, though the money came from our joint account. Under Strategic Partner, one name stood out, Clara Vaughn. I held my breath. Clara, no doubt now, his accomplice in this scheme. I photographed every page with my phone, then placed everything back before Thomas emerged, hair wet. He smiled, grabbed his briefcase, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'll take care of our future." I nodded, lips curling faintly, but my mind echoed three words, our future. No, that was no longer my future. It was the future he was building with Clara, using my sweat and tears. The next day, Marcus sent another report. He'd followed Thomas to a law office. In the video, Clara was there, dressed in a beige business suit, hair tied high, smiling confidently. They sat side by side, exchanging papers. Marcus zoomed in on a draft contract, stating, "Purchase of 40% stake in Green Family Holdings." My blood boiled. Green Family Holdings, the fund I'd built, its seed money from my restaurant's profits. I gripped the phone, as if I could crush the screen. That afternoon, I visited the bank, pretending to inquire about a restaurant loan. The teller, a longtime acquaintance, leaned in and whispered, "Mrs. Green, should I verify the recent large withdrawals? I noticed your husband's been pulling from the joint savings." I forced a smile, nodding, but inside, I burned. The list appeared, $10,000 for consulting fee, $15,000 for wine equipment, $7,500 for interior deposit. Each number was a hammer blow, not just to our finances, but to my heart. That night, alone in the kitchen, I heard Thomas on the phone in the living room. His voice was low, but in the silent house, Each word hit like stones in a well. Yeah, Clara, don't worry. We'll open our own wine bar. Isabella doesn't know a thing. She trusts me blindly. The joint money? I'll handle it. No one will notice. I trembled, my body rigid, hands clutching my coffee mug so tightly, I thought it would shatter. I wanted to storm out, scream in his face, slap him awake, but I held back. I knew it wasn't time. I needed them to believe I was still blind. I wrote in my notebook, scheme, using joint funds for wine bar with Clara, evidence, contract, transactions, words. I sat for hours, listening to the clock tick. Time was no longer an accuser. It was an ally, giving me strength to wait for the curtain to fall. A thought took shape, cold but sharp. Thomas prided himself on wine, reveling in $500 bottles, deluded into thinking he was a connoisseur. Clara fed his ego, using it to siphon money. But I, who'd spent a lifetime in restaurants, who knew wine inside and out, would turn that pride into their downfall. I leaned back in my chair, lips curling slightly, the first time in weeks. Not a smile of joy, but of someone who'd found their enemy's fatal flaw. The idea of revenge flashed like a cold spark in the night. Not loud, not violent, but precise, calculated, and perfectly suited to the person I'd become. After years toiling in kitchens, I didn't want to scream or destroy. I wanted to make him crumble, using the very thing he saw as his compass, his image, his pride, his ostentation. Thomas loved being seen as a fine wine aficionado. He flaunted his knowledge, his connections, his bottles worth hundreds, thousands, and if that refined taste was exposed before him, before Clara, no punishment could sting more. The thought was full of flavor, sweet at first, then bitterly sharp on the tongue. I began planning, simple yet elegant. Late that night, under the dim yellow glow of the kitchen bulb, I opened my notebook and outlined each step. First, the props, pristine, high-end looking bottles with intact capsules. Second, the material, cheap wine, easily mistaken if not scrutinized. Third, the setting, a dinner lavish enough to make Thomas believe he was at his peak. I knew no crude schemes were needed, just enough detail to hit his weakness, his ego. The next morning, I slipped into the restaurant storage, where empty bottles from tastings were kept. Years in the trade taught me to recognize a twist-off cap, an embossed capsule, a Bordeaux or Burgundy shape. I collected used bottles, cleaned them, carefully preserving their labels to create a facade, not copying labels, just repurposing luxurious shells. I wasn't breaking laws, I was gathering discards, things thought worthless, to craft an illusion for the arrogant. At noon, I went to the supermarket, under the guise of routine restaurant shopping. I picked up cases of mid-range wine, the kind on sale for $5.99. Simple, fruity, easy drinking reds. I chose ones with rounded flavors, not too sharp, to serve as bait that an untrained nose would struggle to discern in a quick sip. I smirked to myself as I loaded 2 cases into my cart. Some call it pragmatism. I called it strategy. It wasn't just the wine. I ordered disposable crystal glassware, crisp, white tablecloths, polished cutlery, and tall candles. Everything was set to scream formality. I told myself the setting was key. Candlelight, soft background music, meticulously paired food, all to make Thomas sink into confidence, ready to boast, only to fall when I pulled the curtain. I remembered Evelyn, my old kitchen ally, who knew both me and the business. I called her, casually asking about fine dining table presentation. She chuckled, offering tips on pour temperature and decanting time, not to make cheap wine taste better, but to make the service convincing. Evelyn didn't pry, just gave me a concerned look and whispered, "Be careful, Isabella. Revenge hurts them, but it can tire you too." I replied, "I know, but some things need to be set right." She nodded and helped me gather restaurant supplies to stage at home without drawing attention. I tested my tools first. One afternoon, when Thomas called about a fake meeting, I poured $4.99 wine into a crystal glass, decanted it, let it sit, then tasted it with the flair of a discerning patron, holding the glass to my nose, inhaling, closing my eyes, sipping slowly, mentally noting flavors. I realized then, in dim light, with the right food and music, ordinary wine could seem regale to someone eager to be deceived. I tested multiple times, tweaking temperature, switching pairings from creamy cheese to umami-heavy dishes to mask the wine's sharp alcohol, and experimenting with artificial palate enhancers. Each adjustment brought me closer to my goal, crafting an experience convincing enough for Thomas to proclaim he was tasting a $500 bottle. But my plan wasn't just about fooling the palate. I needed a story, a reason for Clara to show up. I devised a small wine tasting for a fake investor, a vague invite about a collaboration opportunity, sent to Clara in a way Thomas would see. Clara's ambition, not just her affair, would draw her in. I targeted the weekend, when Thomas was freer, eager to show off for his new lover. I needed him in high spirits, tipsy, confident, ready to boast. Over the next few days, I prepared every detail, a menu of buttery, cheesy, grilled meat dishes to elevate the red wine's appeal. I asked Evelyn to bake a small cake to fill the air with warmth, lowering defenses. I rehearsed bland stories for Thomas to mimic. I'd say nothing of my plan, quietly controlling the scene and timing. One night, folding napkins and sipping the $4.99 wine again, my lips puckered at the truth, but curved into a faint smile. I pictured Thomas boasting about his wine collection, his rare bottles. He'd talk, he'd flaunt, he couldn't resist. I'd smile and wait for him to declare, "This bottle's $500. Then I'd pull the receipt from my pocket, place it on the table, and say with icy calm, "Really? I bought it at the supermarket clearance today. Want to see the receipt?" Choking but clear, that line would be the knockout. The more I planned, the colder my heart grew. This wasn't cruel glee, it was justice, my way. I'd given my life to build the restaurant, to build trust he was draining. Now it was time to take something back, with wit and patience. I packed everything into a box, sealed it carefully, and glanced at the wall clock. It ticked on. I smiled, not at its mockery, but because those ticks were counting down to the moment I'd expose it all. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. My mind was no longer a whirl of pain or humiliation, but a checklist precise to every comma. The plan was set the night before, and today I'd make it real. I stood in the small kitchen, holding a sheet packed with bullet points: wine, crystal glasses, tall candles, tablecloth, menu, background music, a seemingly warm dinner, but truly a stage for Thomas to drown in his own shame. I started with the main prop, empty wine bottles. At the restaurant, it was common for fine wines to be consumed, leaving shells behind. I carefully selected bottles that once held Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir, worth hundreds. I cleaned them, kept the labels intact, letting them gleam like treasures. Then, from a hidden bag in my car trunk, I pulled out the cheap wines bought yesterday, light, $4.99 reds. Each drop poured into those elegant bottles carried the bitter irony of betrayal. I carefully filled each bottle with the cheap wine, using a stainless steel funnel to avoid spills, wiping the necks clean and resealing with corks. Years in the trade hid every flaw. When I placed them on the dining room wine rack, even the sharpest eye would be fooled. Next, the menu. I chose a starter of creamy cheese and wild mushroom salad, a main of medium-rare grilled tenderloin with black pepper sauce, paired with fresh truffle pasta. All were picked to complement red wine, making the cheap stuff seem praiseworthy. For dessert, I made tiramisu, soft and moist, dusted with bitter cocoa, sweet enough to distract from any suspicion. With ingredients set, I focused on the setting. My small dining room became a makeshift fine dining corner. Crisp white tablecloth, gleaming crystal glasses, candles casting a shimmering glow. I placed a vase of red roses in the center, not just for decor, but to mask the tension when the moment of truth arrived. Music was essential. I picked a soft jazz playlist, saxophone notes evoking the upscale restaurants Thomas took Clara to. It would make him feel at ease, confident, ready to boast. Everything was prepared with cold precision, but the key was the guest. I'd cleverly sent a fake text from a colleague, got a rare wine to discuss with Thomas, invite Clara to taste. I knew Clara's ambition. She wouldn't miss it. And Thomas, eager to prove his wine expertise, wouldn't decline such a dinner. All day, I worked and reflected. I recalled Thomas raising glasses at parties, bragging to friends. This one's rare, $1,000. To him, wine wasn't for enjoyment, but a measure of his worth. That's why I'd turn a $4.99 bottle into a blade to cut through his mask. By afternoon, everything was set. I stood in the room, candles flickering on the table, reflecting in the cheap wine posing as pride. I closed my eyes, hearing the clock tick. My heart no longer trembled, only held a cold calm. I was ready. Tonight, Thomas would walk into the trap, and when he boasted, "This bottle's $500, I'd smile, place the $4.99 receipt on the table, and watch his world crumble before Clara's eyes. As dusk fell, my house took on an unfamiliar air. Candlelight cast soft golden streaks on the walls, and the shadows of roses stretched across the pristine white tablecloth. I circled the room, checking every detail one last time: crystal glasses neatly aligned, cutlery gleaming, napkins precisely folded. On the wine rack, the bottles filled with $4.99 wine shimmered under the dim light. I paused there, my hand brushing lightly over the Bordeaux label Thomas once cherished. My heart no longer trembled, only held a cold calm. The stage was set, waiting for the main character to enter. The sound of a car engine hummed outside. I took a deep breath, adjusted my dress, and gave a faint smile. Thomas walked in, followed by Clara, in a vibrant red dress, lips painted bold, eyes glinting with a mix of triumph. She scanned the room, momentarily startled, clearly surprised by the elegance in this modest home. Thomas held his head high, a smug smile curling his lips as if he'd orchestrated it all. "Isabella, this looks amazing," he said, his voice drawn out, arms circling Clara's waist as if to emphasize. I smiled, responding with composure. "Just a small dinner. I thought we should treat ourselves sometimes." Clara giggled, her eyes sweeping the table as if inspecting every detail. We sat down. I poured the wine, the red liquid shimmering as it flowed from the fake Cabernet bottle. Thomas immediately seized his glass, holding it to his nose, inhaling deeply like an expert. He closed his eyes, smiling confidently. "Berry notes. A touch of oak. Very balanced," he murmured, as if addressing a panel of wine tasters. Clara gazed at him adoringly, nodding. I only smiled, gripping my glass, eyes tracking every move. Over the appetizer, Thomas launched into his familiar lecture on the true value of wine. He bragged about exclusive tastings he'd been invited to, the rare bottle he'd once tried in Napa Valley. Each word fell from his lips like a pebble into a pond, creating ripples of pretense. I listened quietly, my smile intact, but inside, a deep contempt surged. The man who once shared simple dinners with me had become a hollow show-off. The main course arrived, the aroma of grilled beef filling the room. I carefully poured more wine, this time letting Thomas handle the bottle himself. He lifted it, poured into the glasses with a flourish, then set it down with ceremony. "This bottle," he began, voice thick with drama, "is one of the rarest Cabernets I've ever had. At least $500 a bottle. Not easy to come by." In that moment, the room seemed to freeze. Clara's eyes widened, her hand resting on Thomas's shoulder, her voice full of admiration. "You really know how to pick wine." Thomas grinned triumphantly, head high, taking a sip and swirling his glass for effect. I watched him, my gaze steady, lips curling into an unreadable smile. Inside, my anger had subsided, replaced by a cold satisfaction. He had walked right into the trap I'd set. I set my glass down, my voice soft as a whisper, but resounding in the quiet. "Really, Thomas?" He turned, raising an eyebrow, still smirking arrogantly. "You doubt me? This is top-tier wine, not some common stuff." I tilted my head, eyes locked on his, and said slowly, "Interesting, because I bought that bottle at the supermarket clearance rack this afternoon. Cost exactly $4.99. Want the receipt?" For a fleeting moment, the room plunged into absolute silence. The jazz music played on, but it felt distant. Clara let out a sharp, bitter laugh. $4.99? And you said it was 500? Thomas froze, his face paling, his trembling hand making the wine slosh in his glass. He looked at me, lips moving but no words forming. Clara's expression shifted from admiration to mockery. I stood, walking leisurely to the cabinet, pulling out a thick envelope. I placed it on the table before Thomas, sliding it toward him. Besides the $4.99 receipt, here are the credit card statements. Every gift you bought Clara, every withdrawal from our joint account. I tracked it all. Photos, videos, everything. I paused, locking eyes with him. Did you think I was too blind to notice? Thomas trembled, frantically opening the envelope, his face growing paler with each page. Clara glanced at a few of Marcus's photos, then recoiled in her chair, her eyes filled with disdain. You told me I was the only one. What about this? The bracelet you gave that girl in the photo? She demanded, her voice icy. Thomas stammered, but his excuses choked in his throat. I crossed my arms, standing tall, watching the scene unfold like a play, reaching its climax. My heart held no more pain, only cold satisfaction. I didn't need to shout or cry. I just needed the truth to reveal itself. And Thomas, the man who once boasted and laughed heartily with his mistress, now sat motionless, face ashen, eyes pleading hopelessly. Clara stood, grabbed her purse, and gave a faint, mocking laugh. You're pathetic, can't even tell wine apart. Then she left, her heels clicking on the floor like hammer blows to Thomas's pride. The door closed, leaving me and him in the candlelit room. Thomas looked up, eyes desperate, whispering, Isabella, I can explain. I cut him off, my voice firm. Don't bother. You've performed long enough. The play ends here. I turned, walking toward the door, leaving him alone with the pile of evidence, the flickering candles reflecting the face of a complete loser. The room still carried the scent of burnt candles, grilled beef, and the cheap wine Thomas had boasted was top tier. Clara was gone, the sharp echo of her heels still ringing in my mind, like the bell signaling the end of a clumsy act. Thomas slumped in his chair, hands trembling as he flipped through the papers I'd placed before him. His face was pale, wrinkles stark under the candlelight, no longer the man I once leaned on, but a liar stripped bare. Isabella, his voice broke, grasping for something to hold on to. You have to understand. I did it all, for our future. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Whose future? Ours, or yours and Clara's, or that pipe dream wine bar you funded with my sweat and tears? I stepped closer to the table, my finger tapping lightly on the photo of him and Clara leaving the hotel, hand in hand. This future. Thomas bowed his head, silent. I saw his shoulders shake, whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell, but I gave him no time to recover. I pulled my phone from my pocket, playing an audio file. Clara's voice rang out, clear and ambitious. We just need to push her out. Once we have the full fund, you'll take the title. I'll run it. Isabella will never suspect. Thomas's face flushed, eyes wide. Where did you get that? I have my ways, I replied coldly, sitting across from him. Did you think I was just a naive old woman waiting for her husband to come home late each night? No, Thomas. I tracked every dollar you took, every betrayal. I have enough evidence for a court to rule against you, not just for infidelity, but for embezzling our joint funds. He shook his head frantically, reaching out as if to grab my hand, but I pulled back, dodging him like a stain. Isabella, please. I got caught up. Clara pressured me. I cut him off, each word sharp as a blade. Don't blame Clara. She's just an opportunist. You chose this. You signed. You withdrew money. You raised glasses with her and called it new love. You're the betrayer, Thomas. No one forced you. He stammered, eyes darting, like a man lost. For a moment, I saw the husband from years ago when we built our restaurant together flicker in his haggard form, but that memory only strengthened my resolve. I'd let trust guide me too long. Now reason would end it all. I pulled a second stack of papers from my bag, placing them firmly on the table. Not photos or receipts, but a divorce petition, pre-drafted by a lawyer, with detailed financial records. I looked into his eyes. Sign it. If you have any shred of dignity, sign now. If you refuse, I'll go public with everything. Not just Clara will abandon you. Your friends, neighbors, colleagues, our son. Everyone will know who you are." Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but a car horn outside startled us both. Through the window, headlights flashed. I walked to the curtain, heart steady, knowing who was parked outside. Marcus, the PI, stood there with a file in hand. I'd called him earlier, not to deliver more evidence, but to witness this moment. I opened the door, and Marcus nodded, handing me the envelope, then looked at Thomas, slumped in his chair. "Mr. Green," his voice calm, "your activities over the past months are documented. Photos, videos, statements. If Mrs. Green submits this, you'll have no defense." Thomas clutched his head, letting out a low groan, like a cornered animal. "Isabella, are you trying to destroy me?" I stood tall, voice steady, but resolute. "No, I don't need to destroy you. You've done that yourself. I'm just lifting the curtain you hung." In that moment, I realized this was only the first reveal. The fateful dinner had exposed Thomas's true face to Clara, but now, before me and a witness, he had to confront reality. No more boasts, no more fake smiles, just a defeated man, exposed, trembling in the dying candlelight. I held the divorce petition, placing a pen before him. "You have two choices, Thomas. Sign this and leave quietly, or refuse, and I'll take this entire file to court. Then you'll lose not just me, but your reputation, our son, everything." The air thickened. Thomas picked up the pen, his hand shaking so much the ink smeared. I watched silently, no longer pained. This wasn't the man I loved. This was a stranger in a familiar face, a man who chose betrayal and now had to pay. Outside, a neighbor's clock struck midnight. The chimes echoed, each heavy note confirming the end of a 40-year marriage. Thomas signed, his handwriting shaky, distorted. I nodded slightly, took the paper, and knew the bigger play was still ahead. That night, I sat alone in the living room, candles out, only the scent of $4.99 wine lingering. The first reveal was done, but I knew to end it fully, more strikes were needed. Strikes that would cost Thomas not just his family, but the financial dream he schemed with Clara. And I, Isabella Green, was ready to write the next act. I'd waited for this moment longer than I'd admit to myself. Over the past weeks, scattered clues had been pieced together into a solid chain. Now, only one task remained, turning that chain into lethal evidence, rendering Thomas's excuses meaningless before the law and the public. I didn't want to accuse with emotion. I wanted evidence, every page, every file airtight. First, the bank statements. I sat with Julia, a familiar bank teller who recognized me at the counter. I explained calmly, "I need all transactions from our joint account for the past 6 months." She looked at me, surprised yet sympathetic, then printed pages upon pages. I didn't look right away, waiting until the bank closed. On the drive home, I gathered them into a thick envelope. The numbers were stark: large transfers to Wine and Company, investments, multiple payments to Boutique Eleganza, hotel deposits, jewelry receipts, and repeatedly, transactions to a mysterious account under C. Vaughn. That name, Clara Vaughn, gleamed on the statement like undeniable proof. Next, restaurant receipts and bills. As a restaurant manager, I had access to the POS system and booking history. I printed a list of Thomas's business dinner reservations, many matching large expenses. Through exterior security cameras, Marcus captured Thomas handing payment envelopes to waitstaff, who then logged receipts. I had photos of those receipts on tables, images of a jewelry box delivered to Clara at an apartment. Those small papers formed a larger story: money from our joint account transaction. Clara. I printed emails and texts. Marcus provided screenshots, email exchanges between Thomas and a supposed lawyer about a partnership agreement, texts between Thomas and Clara stating clearly, "I'll handle the finances, you prep the venue. Don't worry, Isabella won't notice." One chat had Clara saying, "Tonight you'll give her a dinner. Once she trusts, it'll go smoothly." Those words needed no explanation. They proved the scheme. Knowing original emails and headers mattered legally, Marcus collected metadata, and I printed and laminated them to preserve their state. Then, videos and photos. Marcus sent a clip filmed from a distance. Thomas and Clara entering a luxury hotel, embracing, heading to a room. The dinner I'd set up, recorded secretly, was golden evidence. Clara whispering to Thomas about the share transfer plan, Thomas laughing, "I'll handle it." In audio Marcus captured at the hotel, Thomas mentioned specific sums, transfer methods, bank contacts. I backed up files to a hard drive and printed transcripts signed by Marcus as the collecting witness. Something unexpected but deadly was internal restaurant records. A few former employees, including Evelyn, provided written statements confirming tip shortages, payments not matching inventory. I had logs of ingredient entries and exits, cross-checked with purchase receipts. Some funds were underreported, offset by vague consulting fees. I printed inventory reports with delivery staff signatures and invoice serial numbers. Together, they painted a financial picture. Someone had abused their position to funnel money out. I also needed an independent witness. I tracked down the supermarket cashier, where I bought the $4.99 wine. She remembered me, confirmed the receipt, and signed as a witness that the wine was indeed $4.99 on sale. She even agreed to record a short confirmation. It was a small but critical detail, tying the $500 wine ruse to Thomas's deception. With everything gathered, I met my lawyer, known from a culinary industry board, specializing in family financial disputes. I placed the envelope on his desk and explained clearly: statements, emails, videos, transcripts, inventory reports, employee statements, supermarket wine receipt, gift photos, hotel bills, the wine and company agreement with Thomas's intended signature. He reviewed each item, asking only technical questions about dates and file origins. When he nodded finally, I knew the case had moved from personal to legal territory. We acted on 3 fronts: temporarily freezing part of the joint account, notifying the bank of suspicious transactions, and filing an urgent asset preservation request with the court, submitting a fraud complaint to investigators, preparing the divorce filing with damning evidence. I wanted every escape route for Thomas blocked socially and legally. I wasn't humiliating him for satisfaction. I wanted him unable to manipulate my money and honor further. Submitting the file brought an odd lightness. Not glee, but a sense of reclaiming control. The photos that once paralyzed me now sat neatly in an envelope, labeled, dated, legally sound. Marcus signed as a witness. Evelyn signed her statement. The cashier confirmed the receipt. I photographed everything for records, then left in the late afternoon, both exhausted and alert. On the drive home, I thought of Thomas, the man who once held my hand through storms, now the centerpiece of an accusation file. I knew more steps awaited: court, questioning, asset negotiations, possibly custody if needed. But with evidence forming an unbreakable chain, justice had a chance to prevail. I'd used time, wit, and patience to turn pain into a tool. And in that moment, amid the ticking of the old wall clock, I felt I was no longer just a victim. I was the one telling the story. The dining room fell into a heavy silence after I placed the papers on the table. The clink of cutlery stopped, laughter cut off, as if sliced by a knife. Clara still held her wine glass, her trembling hand making the dark red liquid slosh dangerously. Thomas, face pale, tried to force a weak smile, as if a clumsy joke could erase the evidence, but his eyes betrayed him: panic, humiliation, and a raging anger, searching for an escape. "Isabella, you misunderstood," he stammered, voice hoarse. I smiled coldly, tilting my head. "Misunderstood? What about the hotel receipts, the lavish dinners, and our joint credit card drained for gifts you bought her? Those are misunderstandings too?" A few guests gasped, glancing at each other. Faces that once admired Thomas's success now turned curious, then contemptuous. The air thickened, like before a storm. Clara, instead of defending Thomas, let out a short, shrill, bitter laugh. "He told me you didn't care about the family anymore, that you were too busy with the restaurant to notice him. I believed him, but now I see he's just a lying coward." The room buzzed with whispers. Thomas spun toward Clara, eyes blazing. "Shut up. but his outburst only convinced everyone my words were true. I kept my voice steady, as if I'd rehearsed this moment for ages. You bragged to everyone about a $500 bottle. You sniffed, you boasted, you strutted like some refined gentleman. But in reality, it's cheap wine I bought at the supermarket for $4.99. And now you want me to believe you haven't been sleeping with this young colleague, haven't spent my money on your shameful dates? A ripple of scornful laughter spread across the dining table. Someone blurted out, "My God, what a ridiculous farce." Thomas shot up, slamming his hand on the table. "Enough. This isn't the place for you to smear me." I calmly pulled out my phone, its screen lighting up. On it were a series of images: Thomas and Clara embracing in a bar, credit card receipts for a diamond necklace, sweet midnight text exchanges. I turned the screen for everyone to see. A collective "ooh" rose, like a chorus of outrage. An older guest shook his head. "Thomas, I thought you were a decent man. This is shameful." Clara had now set down her wine glass, her hand covering her mouth, eyes glistening. But those weren't tears of remorse. It was the fear of realizing she was being dragged down with Thomas, with no way out. "You promised me," she whispered, "that you'd divorce her, that you'd give me a good life. But now, seeing her like this, I'm not a fool anymore." Thomas, frantic, reached for Clara, but she recoiled, her chair clattering backward. "I don't want anything to do with you for another second." The room now felt like a courtroom. Every glance was an accusation. I stood, my voice resounding. "Tomorrow, I'll file for divorce. I have enough evidence of infidelity, enough financial records to prove you've cheated and embezzled our joint funds. I won't let you take anything more from me or this family." A few guests clapped sporadically. The applause started small, then swelled into a thunderous ovation. Not because they rejoiced in my tragedy, but because they witnessed a liar unmasked in the light. Thomas slumped into his chair, face buried in his hands, sweat beading on his forehead. The once arrogant, confident man was now a trembling, hollow shell. Clara hurriedly grabbed her purse and left, her high heels clicking urgently on the wooden floor, not looking back. I took a deep breath. The room was thick with the mingled scents of wine, perfume, and humiliation. I raised my cheap wine glass, looking at everyone. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from a glass of wine, sweet, bitter, but deeply satisfying. A burst of hearty laughter broke the tense air. The women in the room looked at me with eyes of both pity and admiration. Someone whispered, "She's so strong." I set my glass down and turned to leave. The murmurs, applause, and laughter blended into a chaotic sound trailing behind me. But in my heart, I heard only one beat: freedom. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, but the house remained heavy with an unfamiliar silence. Thomas had vanished in the night, leaving his shoes and briefcase on the floor, like a man fleeing his own shadow. I wasn't surprised. From the moment his face paled under the candlelight, I knew he'd choose escape over confrontation. But this time, he couldn't run. I'd prepared everything to ensure justice would find him in every corner. That morning, I met my lawyer in a small downtown office. The thick file sat on the desk, every paper I'd collected over months, every photo, every recording, neatly arranged. The lawyer flipped through each page, nodding. "Mrs. Green, with this evidence, the court won't just grant a divorce in your favor. He risks prosecution for financial fraud and may have to repay every cent he misappropriated." I nodded, my heart indifferent. This was no longer about emotions. This was a legal battle, and Thomas would pay. The divorce petition was filed that day, along with a request to freeze the bank account. By afternoon, I received notice. The joint account was locked. All suspicious transactions halted. Thomas could no longer withdraw money to fuel his delusions with Clara or anyone else. I pictured him at an ATM, card rejected, face contorted in despair. That feeling, I admit, was sweeter than any wine. Days later, I got a call from the bank. The teller's voice was grave. "Mrs. Green, we detected an attempt by Mr. Thomas Green to transfer funds through an intermediary account in Florida. Due to the freeze, the transaction was blocked. We'll forward this to the investigators." I hung up, Feeling weightless, Thomas was still thrashing, but each move only sank him deeper. The first hearing took place in a cold courtroom. I wore a simple black dress, standing tall, hand resting on the thick file. Thomas sat across, visibly thinner, his suit wrinkled, hair disheveled. Clara didn't show. She'd cut all contact. A young lawyer sat beside Thomas, trying to look professional, but clearly with nothing to defend. My lawyer presented each piece of evidence: bank statements, hotel receipts, photos, videos, the recording of Clara calling me a stupid old woman while plotting with Thomas to seize the fund. With each piece, Thomas shrank further, his red-rimmed eyes avoiding everyone's gaze. When the audio played, Clara's voice echoed in the courtroom. "You just need to sign the papers, get her out of the game. The whole estate will be ours." Then Thomas's voice, "Don't worry, Isabella trusts me completely. It's all in my hands." A wave of murmurs swept the room. The judge banged the gavel for silence, but his stern gaze said it all. Thomas bowed his head, hands clenched, nails digging into his skin. When I took the witness stand, I breathed deeply, my voice steady. "Your Honor, I lived with Thomas for over 40 years. I trusted him, built our restaurant from nothing, but instead of cherishing it, he betrayed that trust, not just emotionally, but financially. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice, to protect what I built with my blood, sweat, and tears." Thomas's young lawyer weakly argued that Mr. Green only made poor investments, that meetings with Clara were just business. But against the glaring evidence, every defense made him look more absurd. At the hearing's end, the judge issued a temporary ruling. I'd manage all family fund assets until the case concluded. Thomas was barred from accessing accounts and had to submit a personal asset declaration within 7 days. I looked at him. His face looked slapped repeatedly, skin pale, lips trembling. The press caught wind. Businessman Thomas Green, accused of embezzling family assets. Wife, exposes infidelity and fraud. Headlines ran online. Images of Thomas leaving the courthouse. Head bowed, shared widely. Old friends and colleagues called, not to check on me, but to express disgust at Thomas. Loyal restaurant customers supported me, saying, "We're with you, Isabella. You're stronger than anyone." Thomas was besieged by public opinion. He called me repeatedly, leaving desperate messages. "Isabella, please don't take this further. I'll step back. Return everything. Please spare me some dignity." I listened but didn't reply. Dignity? The dignity he buried with late-night calls, fake fine wines, and sweet lies to another woman. A week later, Thomas faced court again for violating the account freeze. My lawyer presented more evidence, bank records showing he tried to have an old friend withdraw cash for him. The judge frowned, voice stern. "Mr. Green, you've not only betrayed your family, but disrespected the law. The court will consider additional penalties." Thomas's shoulders slumped, staggering, like a soulless man. I looked at him, feeling neither hate nor pity. This was the inevitable consequence of his choices. Leaving the courthouse, I took a deep breath. The sky was unusually clear. I realized I was no longer the gloomy woman sitting in the kitchen, listening to the clock's accusing ticks. I was the one holding the scales, using truth and law to reclaim justice. Thomas had lost Clara, money, reputation. Soon he'd lose his freedom to choose. The legal blow had landed, and I knew this was just the start of the price he'd pay. After the trial, my house felt strangely vast and quiet. No more late footsteps from Thomas. No strange perfume on his suit jacket hung over the sofa. No whispered midnight calls. Only the steady ticking of the old clock my mother left behind. But this time, it wasn't an accusing rhythm. It sounded like a drum roll for a new beginning. Standing in the kitchen, looking around, I realized I'd spent half my life living for others. I'd sacrificed my youth to build the restaurant with Thomas. I'd bowed my head when he dismissed me, grew cold, turned wine, something I loved to my core, into a tool for boasting. Now, with everything collapsed, I was left with myself. But in that loss, I found something greater: freedom. I began cleaning. Old wedding photos, anniversary gifts, concert tickets Thomas once gave me, all packed into boxes, stored in the basement. Not to erase the past, but to make room for the present. The house grew brighter, tidier, and I felt lighter. One afternoon, passing the familiar supermarket, I stopped at the clearance wine rack. Cheap bottles stood neatly, neon lights casting a mundane yet familiar glow on their labels. I picked up a $4.99 bottle, a thought stirring. This wine had unmasked Thomas's lies. It had toppled his boasts in an instant. Why not make it a symbol of my rebirth? During construction, I'd sit in the space, watching painters work, my heart alive like the young woman starting her dream. Sometimes, I laughed alone, picturing Thomas buried in legal papers while I built a new beginning. The contrast was sweeter than any dessert I'd tasted. At the opening, I invited close friends and loyal customers from the old restaurant. The $4.99 sign glowed under golden lights. People chuckled at the name, then grasped its meaning. "Isabella, this is brilliant," a woman whispered. "You turned pain into pride." I smiled, raising the first glass in my new bar. The wine, though cheap, brought the deepest sense of freedom I'd ever felt. The bar quickly became a community haven, not just for good drinks, but for the story behind the name. Women came to me, sharing their own broken marriages, betrayals, finding in me a source of strength. I listened, shared, sometimes just sat silently with them over a glass. I realized I hadn't just opened a bar, I'd opened a door for wounded souls to rest. The press wrote about me. A local paper ran from victim to victor. Isabella Green and her $4.99 wine bar. They called me the woman who turned bitterness into a manifesto. I didn't deny it. Each time I looked at the sign, I saw myself a journey from pain to pride. Thomas sank deeper. Legal proceedings drained him. The court ruled I'd keep full control of the family fund and most assets. He was ordered to repay the misappropriated funds, plus compensation. Clara had vanished, leaving him alone in a cheap suburban rental. I heard through friends, he was gaunt, avoiding everyone, no longer daring to hold his head high. Oddly, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. It was simply the inevitable cost of betrayal. One late evening, after closing the bar, I sat alone at the counter. Outside the glass, golden leaves fell, street lights casting a warm glow on the wet pavement. I poured myself a glass of cheap red, sipped slowly, and spoke aloud. "Thank you, Thomas. Because of you, I learned to live for myself." The words echoed in the quiet, light as a farewell. From that day, I stopped thinking of him. I stopped seeing the past as a wound, but as the foundation for my rebirth. I joined a local women's club, shared my story, urged others not to fear standing up to betrayal. I posted small notes around the bar. No need for fine wine, just truth. Customers smiled reading them, and I knew I'd planted seeds of courage. A year after that fateful dinner, $4.99 became a community hub. For the opening anniversary, I hung a large wooden sign by the door. "This is more than a wine bar. It's a reminder that justice sometimes comes in the humblest form. A cheap glass of wine can topple a castle of lies, and everyone has the right to stand, raise a glass, and say, 'I deserve the truth.'" That night, the bar was packed. Everyone raised their glasses, the lights sparkling, making the room glow. I stood behind the counter, watching, tears welling, but not from sorrow. They were the tears of a woman who'd found herself after walking through hell. As laughter echoed, I recalled my mother's words, "Isabella, wine can be sweet or bitter, but what matters is, it's real. People only get drunk on lies." I smiled faintly, raising my final glass of the night, whispering, "Mom, I understand." And so, from the shards of a marriage, from a $4.99 bottle, I was reborn, not as a grieving wife, not as a pitiful victim, but as a free, proud woman, strong enough to write her own manifesto. Sometimes justice can be poured from a glass of wine, sweet, bitter, but deeply satisfying. Thank you for joining me on this journey of turning pain into strength and reclaiming my freedom. Don't forget to subscribe to keep following these dramatic real-life stories and join me in the next video.